Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I think that today I think we should talk about Ukraine in a broader perspective. I think let's talk about it in depth of what it means to the world regarding power, hegemony, and the status of superpowers. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're going to talk about. There's lots going on. Certainly, there's what happened with the Israeli attack on Yemen. Certainly, there's a lot going on in the Middle East. But one of the things I think we need to talk about is Ukraine from a kind of a foundational perspective. You know what it means, and what drives the seemingly irrational actions of the aggressors, shall we say, right? The clearly, if we look at what happened here, the history is pretty clear. NATO has been expanding up to the border of Russia, and for any number of reasons, surrounding Russia with military bases and implying that at some point, we're going to, I mean, literally saying at some point, we're going to take Russia out, right? At some point, we'll take Russia down. Russia's got to go. And then we will, swallow Russia up and move on. It's kind of a perspective that says the U.S. is the most powerful. The U.S. and its allies are the most powerful country, alliance. And we can, just swallow up the rest of the world. Kind of, they're the Borg, resistance is feudal, and at some point, all of the world will be ours. Now, there's the other perspective that we have an economic system that really doesn't work from the perspective of being a static economic system, that it works as an entity of its own, and it doesn't need, to take other things to go outside of its borders. It can, you've got an economic system that works fine as it is, rather than a neoliberal economic system that works off of debt, which, if left to its own merits, will in fact, eat its young, will eat its own, will destroy itself. So therefore, it has to go outside of its borders. It has to continue to expand. It has to have, like a vampire, that has to have fresh blood and fresh victims. And of course, when you have neoliberalism that lives off of debt, once everyone inside of the borders are indebted as far as you could possibly get them, what is it? We have got like 37 or so trillion dollars that we're told about inside the United States. Certainly, if we look at the whole system, we would have to take in the debt of we would have to include in the conversation the debt of all the European countries, many of which are way above 100%. Of debt to GDP ratio. And then, of course, if you add public debt, private debt, and you add states and cities and counties and other entities, you're going to have, 250, $300 trillion in debt or more. Okay. And the reality of it is, this is not a sustainable system, and it doesn't work. So what does it have to do? It has to go outside of its borders, and it has to start finding other markets, finding other victims, finding other ways to expand itself, finding new people and groups and countries to put in debt, finding new things to sell so they can continue to expand and survive. That's it. The problem that they have is, in order to do that, now, for some time, they could continue to swallow up small countries. They could continue to take Iraq. Because right now, a lot of people don't know what happened with Iraq. What happened with Iraq's oil? Right now, when Iraq sells oil, the money goes to New York Bank. And then Iraq has to ask them for some money for their own oil. But right now, Iraq's oil is being looted by the U.S. because what happens with neoliberalism, you have to continue to go out and find other markets to loot, right? Syria, what's happening? They're looting the oil. Libya, they overthrew Libya. They're looting the oil. Why are they threatening Venezuela right now? Because Venezuela has a lot of oil, and they want to loot the oil. Why? Because the system as it operates right now is unmanageable. it cannot continue down the road that it's going. It's just coming apart. Certainly, the people inside of this system are unhappy. They're being preyed upon by the ruling elite. Um, and of course, the revolution is in the air one way or the other. People want to revolt. People want to push back. People have had enough. Russell Brand the other day was talking about UK is on the on the verge of exploding. These countries are on the board, the US and its vassal allies, which now are becoming its food, are all on the verge of exploding. So the US and all of its vassals has to eat Russia and China. Sorry, we ate the little guys. Now we got to eat the big guys. We got to keep going. We got to keep surviving. The problem they have is this now. It's one thing when you're taking advantage of small countries that can't defend themselves. Now that you've eaten as many of them as you can, you got to go after the big world powers, and the big world powers can defend themselves. So let's talk about Ukraine. What it's about, of course, is NATO expands up to Russia's border, in and around Russia, and then eventually NATO takes out Russia and it splits Russia up. They've already talked about how they're going to split it up. They've had conferences in Europe about how they're going to split Russia up. We're going to split Russia up and everybody gets a piece. Why is that? France lost the Sahel. France lost all of these countries that they were looting in Africa. The European colonial countries are losing the countries that they're looting in Africa. Some of the countries they've been looting in Asia. So now they want to put them in debt, but they can't, because these countries are saying, we don't want anything to do with you. We want to sell our own stuff and make our own money. France can't survive like that. England can't survive on their own. They can't continue to provide the number one, the bribery that they give to their citizens as they lie to them. They just give them, what they give them is the appearance of a little better lifestyle than the people in other countries. And that's falling, and they don't have the money to provide that even anymore. So now they're just saying, let's prep you for war. We'll go to war wherever, Russia, China, whatever. So a lot of you will just die, and then we can get rid of a lot of you, so we don't have as many to feed. So that'll be easier. And plus, we'll take Russia and China, and then we can continue to survive. Okay. So as they began to surround Russia, the problem is when you start surrounding superpowers, and now you got to take down a superpower, it's just too big. It's like a bunch of, think about this, you got a pride of lions and they're starving, right? And as they starve, and this happens actually too, when you have a bunch of lions and they're eating whatever, they're eating zebras and things like that. Okay, fair enough. Now there's no zebras and things like that. What are they going to do? They have to go after bigger game. It's more difficult. And now it's to the point where they got to go after elephants. That ain't going to work out real well, is it? They're going to starve to death. But they're like, well, we're starving to death. We got to try to eat something. Let's try to eat an elephant. Well, you got to fight an elephant. No, only problem is you're not going to win that battle. Oh, we're going to try to eat a hippo. Well, you're not going to win that battle. But they're desperate because they're going to starve to death. So this pride of lions now takes on a potential meal that's too powerful. But they're so desperate, they got to try. Otherwise, they starve, right? Okay. That happens in the wild sometimes with predators, packs of predators. They end up run out of small prey and they go after bigger and bigger prey, and it's out of desperation. So here's my point. I think what we're looking at is that to some extent that was inevitable. And so here's where we are. The US and the Europeans have come up to the border of Russia, and here's what they're saying. Let me maybe simplify this. When a superpower establishes its border, it also establishes, you might have heard me this before, its border and its strategic border, meaning this is our border, but we have another strategic area, a zone that says you can't come any closer than that. Anything closer than that is a threat, and we reserve the right to defend ourselves against a threat. You're not on our property, actually, you're not, but we're not going to let you just walk right up to our border and get too close. If you start getting too close, we'll fight. Oh, that's all superpowers, world powers do that, and regional powers if they can. So the U.S. said, all right, we're going to get closer and closer and closer, the U.S. and its allies, because we're trying to get you. And then in they go to Ukraine. And Russia always said, Ukraine's, you try to get that, it's not going to happen. That's a fight. And the U.S. said, yeah, we're going to do that. And Russia said, it's a fight if you do. We'll just let you know. I mean, this is history. This is the Budapest 2008 and on and on. They've always said you try Ukraine, then you get a fight. Well, the US and its vassals said, well, we're going into Ukraine because we're trying to take you out. How can we take you out if we don't get Ukraine? That's what we're going to use to take you out, and there's nothing you can do about it. And when Russia sent a document to NATO and said, look, Ukraine's too far. We got to have a meeting. We got to sit down and discuss this. And NATO said, you don't get a say in this. In other words, no, we're too powerful. You see, Russia, and this is what it boils down to. We know, and you know, that you have declared Ukraine your strategic border. And we know, and you know, that if we get inside of Ukraine, it's too close and we can hurt you from there. We can do all kinds of stuff. We can terrorist acts on you. We can lob things at you. We can put nuclear weapons there and be really close to Moscow and threaten a first strike on you. We can do all kinds of things. You're in a deep and serious trouble if we get there. You know it and we know it, and we're going to try to get in there. And Russia's saying, okay, well, you can, but you got to fight to be in there. We're going to fight you. That's it. That's the red line. That's where we fight. Now, since we're fighting, that means that this is calling the question. Here's the question. Who controls Russia's strategic border? Is it Russia or is it the U.S. empire? That's the question. That's the question. Now, what happens? As I've said before about the U.S. uses proxy wars, proxies, right? But you understand why they use proxies, because they ain't going to fight themselves. Because the U.S. leadership knows we're kind of on the verge of pushing people to revolution. And if a lot of they learned after Iraq, especially Iraq, they were going to actually try to do the wars themselves. They were like, okay, we'll do the wars ourselves. We'll just go fight these countries and whatever. We'll do our wars. What they learned was the American people won't tolerate those body bags coming home, and they'll start to lose control if that happens. So they're like, well, we got to use proxy wars. And Vietnam was a proxy war. Afghanistan was a proxy war, on and on and on, right? We got to use a proxy. We got to use some cannon fodder. Okay. But the U.S. ain't going to fight for that cannon fodder. They're not fighting for that cannon fodder. They're not dying for that cannon fodder. There's a reason they use proxies and cannon fodder, because they ain't going to do the fighting. So what happened? The U.S. is saying to Russia, we recognize, and Europe, we recognize your strategic border is Ukraine, but we're going to try to take it anyway. And we realize it's a red line, but we're going to try to take it anyway. And Russia's saying, okay, we're going to fight. Now, where are we? Let's deal with current news, right? Russia has prevailed. Now, it's not over. So let's not pretend it's over. I'm not saying it's officially over, but effectively, what we see now is Russia is in a position of prevailing, right? We see the proxy weakening and Russia strengthening. We see Russia's economic situation strengthening. We see Russia's diplomatic alliances and partnerships strengthening, right? Russia's worldwide respect. Everything about Russia is strengthening, and everything about the U.S. empire, its vassals, and its proxy are weakening. Now, the United States is, under the Trump administration, for God knows all the terrible things I could scream all day about them, they at least recognize that, okay, this ain't working. One of the reasons is because they're desperate and they want to move on to something else, right? We'll get to what that is in a minute. No, I'll just simply say like this. This is the Greater Israel project. The U.S. is basically saying, okay, we can't take Russia, and it appears China ain't much of an option either. Either one of these wars we lose. So here's what we'll do. We'll go to the Middle East, and we'll take the whole Middle East, and then we'll choke everybody out from oil. That's all it is. Once we get Iran, then we'll have full control. And of course, their plans are eventually to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia, to overthrow the government of the Gulf. Yep, they're already compliant, but not compliant enough. They're already compliant, but they still do business with Russia and China, and plenty of it. So the United States plan is take out, everyone who is in opposition, take out the whole Shia crescent, okay, first. Once they get that, then they go after the vassals in the Gulf states, and they say to them, you've been good vassals, but not good enough. because you're still friends with Russia. You will drop Russia and China. You will sell them no oil whatsoever, or we'll kill you and replace you. That's the plan for the greater Middle East. It is, we can't defeat Russia and China, so we'll grab the oil for the entire world. And once we grab the entire world's oil, that'll be our leverage for power. And we'll take China out then. They will get no oil from us. And we'll take Russia out because we'll be able to control the prices of oil, and Russia sells oil. Once we control the prices, we can take Russia out with that. And we'll be in Russia's back door too. So we can cut them off in the Baltics, and then we can go do all the kinds of things. And we can then threaten their allies and force people to stop doing business with them. So the plan is to take over the entire Middle East. And then once you take over the entire Middle East, that will be the leverage that they'll use to try to rule the world for these pinky in the brain lunatic neocons. Okay. But on the border of Russia, I mean, look at the irrationality of the Europeans. They seem irrational. They seem to make no sense. You look at them and you're like, come on, guys, let's not pretend any. Why are you pretending? What are you going to do? You got 18, 19 rounds of sanctions, and you're going to the 19th or 20th round of sanctions. They're not going to do anything. But what they will do is to continue to maintain the fiction that they are the ones in charge. It's like one of the things you have to understand. I used to do sales. They're not. Somebody said they're bordering on insanity. Not really. The only thing they can control is the narrative. So that they believe the only thing they can address is the narrative. So they're trying to address the narrative. The only thing they can control is the narrative. They're trying to control the narrative. And I used to do sales. And one thing you understand in sales, and that is or politics, right? The old saying about a conversation in politics: if you're explaining, you're losing. Whoever's asking the questions, whoever's the aggressor on the conversation is in power. They have the power position in a conversation. So the Europeans are basically arguing we have the power position. Now, they don't have the kinetic power position. They don't have the power position on the battlefield, but they're trying to maintain the verbal narrative end of a power position. That's all they can do. We don't have power on the battlefield. We don't have soldiers. We don't have any of that. So we can continue to use our ability to run our stinking mouths to try to control the situation. So what do? Did they really believe that they're going to get troops on the ground? Here's the position. Russia says we can't have troops on the ground. We say we can. And we're going to control them. We're the ones who control the narrative, not Russia. This isn't about troops on the ground. They know that they can't put troops. They don't even have troops to put on the ground. They know that. But in the narrative, they've got 1 million troops to put on the ground. In the discussion, they got tons of troops to put on the ground. And if they don't have troops to put on the ground, then they don't have control of the narrative. So they just got to act as though they do. Number one. Number two, even then, knowing they don't have troops on the ground, they got to stop the Americans from coming up with some kind of a conclusion. They've got to stop the Americans from coming up with some kind of a diplomatic solution, though it probably won't happen. They can't even allow, excuse me, it's late, I'm tired of yawning. They can't even allow the possibility of it. So if you're arguing about whether or not they actually can put troops on the ground, whether they can physically support those troops, whether they can, whether Russia will allow them, we already know they won't. You're barking up the wrong tree, because their issue is not, their arguments and discussions are not about putting troops on the ground, even though they say that. Their arguments are about controlling the narrative and continuing to throw any kind of a monkey wrench into the process between the U.S. and Russia, which I'm not convinced are going to go but so far anyway. But the Europeans can't take the chance that they'll go anywhere under any circumstances. I also think that what we're looking at is a conversation of power. In the narrative, somebody's powerful and somebody's not. Somebody won and somebody didn't win, right? In reality. And of course, we see the Russians are winning and the NATO is not. And NATO's, well, they just can't admit that. They can't admit that they're losing. It ain't that they're losing. It ain't that they know or don't know that they're losing. Exactly. Somebody said Russia is the real world. Right. Russia's operating in the real world, in the world where somebody wins on the battlefield or loses on the battlefield. Europe can't do that because they can't compete with Russia on the battlefield. So they have to compete where they can, which is in the narrative, magical world of, controlling the narrative. And the narrative is about who controls Russia's strategic border. If you don't believe me, think about Taiwan. What is that? They say, China says Taiwan is part of China. America, all of Europe, officially on paper, they say Taiwan is part of China. We all acknowledge that. That's what they all say. It's part of China. Yes, it's part of China, which is what makes this worse, right? Taiwan is part of China. We officially recognize that. However, we still reserve the right. You can't get any closer to China's strategic border than saying Taiwan is actually part of China. But what does the US say? You can't integrate the country this island that we recognize as part of your country. You can't integrate it into your country. And so does Europe. No, you better stop. You better not do that with Taiwan. Taiwan? What are they saying? We control your strategic border. Now, you can't come up to our border. You can't tell Canada or Mexico or Venezuela or that. Now, our strategic border is the entire hemisphere, right? The U.S.'s entire hemisphere is our strategic border. You don't have any say. You better not set foot on Venezuela or in anywhere in South America, God forbid, or any place like that. The Caribbean, don't even come near there. That's our strategic border. But we have a right to come right up to yours in both Taiwan, which is inside of China officially, and with Ukraine. Why? What does that say? We're in charge. We're in power. We decide what your strategic border is. And here's what that means. As the world hegemon, we have a strategic border. You don't. That's what it is. The U.S. is saying no one is allowed to have a strategic border but us. And our strategic border is the entire world. It includes space. We can have a space force. You can't. It includes the moon. What are you doing thinking about building a moon base? You can't do that unless we give you permission. Our strategic border is everywhere in the universe. You don't have one, not even in your own country, to say, China, that's not your strategic border. We've said you better not try to do that. Even though it's part of China, I'll give you that, but you better not try to integrate it into China. And we get to decide that. And that's really what this is about. It's about, does the United States get to control and dominate Russia and China's strategic border? I think to some extent, from a kinetic perspective, it has been answered. They tried to dominate Russia's strategic border, and Russia has repelled them. When Russia said, we need to negotiate about our strategic border. I mean, that was, if you think about it, Russia's first attempt was to a negotiation. They gave a list of issues, and on that issue right there was Russia's strategic border. But the way they put it was NATO expansion. We need a security framework for Europe, and we need to address NATO expansion. And the US and NATO said, no, you don't get to do that. We are in charge. You want to talk about your strategic border. There is no strategic border. You don't get to have one. Only we do. And our strategic border runs right up to your border on all sides. We control the globe. Any border that you have is our strategic border, because we've determined that you don't get a strategic border. The U.S. says, oh, Taiwan is China's in the South China Sea doing things. It's the South China Sea is our strategic border, 6,000 miles away. Taiwan, inside of China, that's part of our strategic border. You don't get to do that. We'll fight you. In the same way that Russia says we will defend our strategic border, which is Ukraine, the United States says we'll defend our strategic borders, which are Ukraine and Taiwan. They're both our strategic borders. If you try to exert your political or military influence on either one of those, well, then we've got to stop you from doing that. You don't get a right to do that. You don't have anything outside of your border. We own everything. And eventually we're going to choke you out and take yours too. Again, sounds good if you're the hegemon, But and it's fine when it's Iraq or something like that, and you can actually maintain that through power and force and coercion. The problem is when you try it on a world power, they're going to say, we're not going to buy that. And at some point, it has to get to, at some point, it was inevitable. It gets to, the answer is no. And then there's fighting words. And that's where Russia was. Russia said, nah, I don't think so. And the US said, yeah. And Russia said, well, then we have to fight. And the US basically said, yes, yeah, you're right. But we've got a proxy there. But the issue was the US was never actually prepared to fight this proxy war. It was, we'll start the proxy war. Then the sanctions will finish Russia off. And when the sanctions finish Russia off, the US didn't have another plan. They just, well, we'll just keep the proxy war, hoping and hope something good happens. Ain't nothing good happening when you're fighting Russia on its border. Nothing good's going to happen. Lots of things are going to happen, but ain't none of them good. Not for the U.S. And the U.S. can grow its own food, produce its own energy, and it is protected by a lot of oceans and, as they say, insignificant powers to the north and south and fish to the east and west. So if you can grow your own food, produce your own energy, and you've got military protection, your country can make it in the long run. U.S. can make it in the long run. Europe can't. Europe can't really grow its own food. And I guess they're afraid of cow farts or something. They're so absurd that they're doing everything they can to make sure they can't grow their own food. So Europe can't grow its own food. Europe can't produce its own energy, which means Europe wilts away. And in my opinion, at some point, Europe falls into a bloody revolution. I think now we're getting closer and closer. I said that a while back, but I think we're getting to the point now where it's no longer probable. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. That Europe falls in, that at least some places in Europe fall into a bloody revolution. I'll add this. It's not just, well, it's not just Russia, right? Sure, it is the Ukrainian conflict, the insistence of the ruling elite of Europe to say we won't give up on our quest to control Russia's strategic border, even though we will have significant economic pain from this. But the ruling elite, they ain't going to have no economic pain. They're still eating seasoned Chilean sea bass and asparagus and a fine wine. Right? They're fine. They're going to be fine. Even though they're going to take a hit, they're still going to be far richer than the average peasant. But now the middle class person is now going to be a peasant. And there's going to be poverty and there's going to be misery. But what do they really care? Because they ain't going to be impoverished or miserable. They'll still be, as long as they're richer than the middle class and the poor people, they're fine with that. But the Europeans are accustomed to a particular lifestyle, and that lifestyle is about to go down, and it ain't going to go down slowly. They're not going to, Europe is not slowly going to regress back to the medieval times. It is going to go off a cliff. And when it does, it's revolution time. It is revolt time. That's the kind of time they're on, right? They're on revolt time. Okay. But there's something, it's almost as if the ruling elite couldn't just deal with, they just couldn't say we're going to deal you a terrible hand and we're going to prove that we are not aligned with you, with the working class. There's something else going on here too, and that is this. There's Israel. You see, at the same time, out of desperation, particularly, and I think a big part of it is the desperation of losing the war in the proxy war in Ukraine, the U.S. and its allies, its vassals, then said, well, if we can't do that, then we'll embark upon this project with our other proxy, Israel, and we'll call it the Greater Israel the project. But if you really look at that, if you look at Israel through the perspective of Israel is a imperial outpost of Europe and the colonial the colonial European powers and the U.S. empire, that it could collectively, together with the U.S. doing all of that heavy financial and military lifting, that The U.S. is saying Israel's a huge military base, and we're going to expand that military base, and we're going to take over everything in the Middle East so that we can control the oil and the lifeblood of oil for the world out of the Middle East. That's our plan. We can't beat Russia. We can't beat China. Boom, we'll go to the Middle East and take everything, and then we'll be able to leverage the whole country, right? Leverage everything there. But in doing so, because they're so desperate, and because there are people in the way there, particularly the Palestinians, in order to do that, they have to revert to their old ways, their old colonial ways. That's right. They're going back to their dark ages, colonial times, when they just go ahead and genocide the people. So basically, it's saying to Israel, look, green light. We don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time. We got to take over the whole Middle East. We got to take Syria. We got to take Iran. We got to take Lebanon. We got to take all of them. And then after that, every place, Qatar and, excuse me, Saudi Arabia, Oman, all of them, we will replace all of their leaders with compliant puppets once we get the Greater Israel Project, Turkey, everything. We will, since we can't take the big boys, we'll take everything else. We'll put it together and lump it in one, and we'll use that as our leverage. That's the plan. But the European people and the American people don't have don't have the stomach for the kinds of things they're doing, right? They have been saying to their people, we do these things because we're moral. That's right. We want to bring democracy to these countries. We want to look out for the women. We're going to want to look out for the children. We want to look out for the trans and the gays and the whoever, whatever minority we can make up. Then we want to look out for them. We're all doing this for good. We've been Iraq. We were freeing them from Saddam Hussein. Russia, we need to free them from the evil Putin. China, we need to free them from the evil communists. We've got all of these countries that we want to take over and steal their stuff, but we have been virtue signaling about we're doing it because we are the good guys, and we're overthrowing countries and murdering people because we're the good guys. Okay, but now they're desperate and they don't really have time for that kind of rhetoric anymore. They do it when they can, but they can't really afford it. They ain't got time for it. So now their plan is this: look, out come the fangs and claws. We need to take everything in around Israel. So you know what? We've been hiding that we're allied with Al Qaeda and ISIS, but you know what? Just let's put ISIS, Al Qaeda in charge of Syria. We can't afford drop. What do we got? $50 million warrants on these ISIS leaders. Yeah, take it off. We can't afford that false paradigm anymore, where we're doing it for good reasons. We just knuckle dragging apes. That's who we are. It is what it is. Israel, you go ahead and just kill anybody that gets in your way. And if they don't get in your way, you kill them too. Because we don't have time. We can't afford it. China and Russia is too powerful, growing too fast. We got to take these oil fields as quick as possible. And the Palestinians are in the way, just kill them all. We don't care. Do what you got to do. We'll handle it back home. You do that. And what that has done is added something else. And that is, at the same time that neoliberalism, that the people in America and Europe, you people in Europe are so screwed, are figuring out finally that the ruling elite is not acting on their behalf, that their parties are not acting on their behalf, that they don't have democracy, that they've been lied to, hoodwinked, bamboozled, etc. At the same time they're doing all that, the Israeli project is also helping them to figure out that the ruling elite does not have a moral alignment with the people of the countries, and that the ruling elite see the people of these countries as a hindrance, as something that's in the way. It's like, dude, can't you see we're trying to take countries here? We're trying to take the whole Middle East, and you morons are marching around with Free Palestine signs. It ain't about Palestine to us. It's about power. And if the Palestinians got to all die, we don't care. How quick can we kill them? We just want to kill them as fast as possible so we can move when we got a project here. For God's sake, here, can't you see we got a project? We're trying to do this here, and you guys are in the way marching around with your free Palestine flags. Cut it out. Palestinians are dead. You got to accept it. They're none. Then we're going to go on to Lebanon. We're going to go on to country after country, and we're going to do We're going to do a rampage like you wouldn't believe. Why? Because we're desperate. Because we are so desperate. What else are we going to do? We know how to kill and murder. So, and we tried to do it the right way. We said we tried, we were going to use Ukraine to take Russia out, but Russia wouldn't cooperate. We're going to take Taiwan and you take China out. We're still trying, we'd like to, but things ain't looking so good for that one, if you want the truth. But we do think that we can gain an advantage in the Middle East, and we can just blame it on Israel and just say it's Israel expansion, but it's really us because we really control Israel. But you're not allowed to know that. Israel is our attack dog, but you ain't allowed to know that. And you don't really want to believe it. So we'll let you blame Israel and pretend that Israel is a separate country that's dragging us around as we pay all their bills. They ain't a separate country. This is a Zionist empire. They are part of, because why? Because Zionism is nothing but a brutal, vicious, brutal cult. And the United States utilizes brutal, vicious cults. That's our favorite thing to do. So now we're going to impoverish Europe. It's going to be a conflict zone because for us, there's a lot of money in a conflict zone. They're almost broke, right? You got people in the neoliberal CEOs, and what do? They go to a company, they buy a company, and they loot the company. Guess what? Remember when they told you the United States was going to they want to run it like a corporation? That's what they're doing. They do a hostile takeover, then they loot the whole company, and then they bankrupt it. Look around, my friends. They're running the United States like they run companies. They do a hostile takeover, they loot the company, and then they take everything, suck it dry like a vampire, and whatever's left, they bankrupt. That's what they're doing with the United States. That's it. So now they're simply acting in a way that's so brutal and so brazenly brutal and vicious. And we can see who they are. They're like, we don't care because we're desperate. And the people in America and the people in Europe are starting to be like, and you guys, I mean, you're just going to do a genocide in front of our faces? Really? And we're not even supposed to say anything. And the ruling elite is like, perhaps that part about we don't really care what you think, maybe that's not getting through. I don't know, guys. Maybe let's try this. Perhaps we can articulate it to this way. We don't care what you think. We're going to commit a genocide. This ain't the first genocide. We're going to commit genocide after genocide after genocide. So what? You have no power. You have no say. It's not a democracy. Shut up. Go work your 3 jobs and still not be able to pay your bills, and we will make your life even worse. So we don't care. There was a time when we really needed to care about what you thought, and we were concerned. Now, no. You have no rights. You have nothing. And just accept it and shut up. Move on or don't. We don't care. Accept it or don't. That's up to you. We're in charge and you ain't. And right now we got a genocide to do. We're trying to stay in charge. And you're trying to interrupt our genocide, we'll lock you up. We'll throw you out of the country. We'll put you in alligator Alcatraz. Then we'll send you to El Salvador. We'll just wherever. We don't care. We're sending you out of here. Get out of our way, man. We're overthrowing these countries and stealing all of their stuff, and you're just in the way. So I don't know what to tell you. We're the ruling elite, and you ain't. You figure that out. And that's where they are. But because they're getting farther away from the people, they're getting more arrogant. They're reeking of massive amounts of hubris. They're like, look, we can do anything we want and nobody can stop us. And we don't care about the American people. And we don't care because you know what? We run those machines. In the midterm, we control the machines. We control what the machines spit out. We control all of that. We ain't afraid of the midterms. Not only that, so what? What's going to happen? The Republicans are going to win the midterms. We own them. The Democrats might eke some out the midterms. We own them. We're the ruling elite, and we own them. So what do you think? You're going to win one of these 2 parties and somehow something's going to change? It's the opposite. If either of these 2 parties win, or both of these 2 parties win, then you're in fact guaranteeing that way there won't be change. But that's the game, and we'll play it as long as we can. There you go. There you go. That's what it is. The ruling elite understand that they are distancing themselves with foreign policies from the working class, from the electorate. but they don't care because they have nothing but disrespect and condescension for the electorate. So they're like, at this point, that's fascism. You know what I mean? The government goes from, we're going to do everything we can to convince you to act in a manner that's not in your best interest, to we ain't even going to try anymore. We're going to do whatever we want, and you will suffer it. You will suffer. If you have to suffer, you suffer. We'll do whatever we want, and we'll tell you it's in your best interest, even though you know it ain't, and we know it ain't. But who cares? Because we're in charge and you ain't. That's the way it goes. I mean, you should keep your mouth shut, because we're already, we suffer your effrontery to even exist. So since we suffer your existence, God forbid you should ask us to do anything other than whatever we want to do, and you will shut up and support it. And if we need to start a war and thin the herd, shall we say, so be it. But right now we got terrible things to do, and your job is to shut up and accept them, is what it is. And one of the things that has happened is the conflict between the US and Europe is the US is as an imperial power, actually, I hate to say this, they're smarter. They understand we tried to take out Russia and it didn't work. We ain't throwing bad money for good. Fine, we tried to take out for Russia, it didn't work. Great. What we're going to do is take all the resources we were using to try to take out Russia, and we're going to move those over to go after Iran and all the Gulf states and all that stuff and other things. So we'll take that. We're still going with hegemony, but we got to take a bit of a circuitous route, shall we say, because the route that we have chosen ain't working so well. But that's okay. We'll choose another route and we'll still run the world. We'll still take out Russia and China. We just got a different plan for them. Now, the people of Europe are angry. The people of America are angry particularly over numerous things, not the least of which being the genocide in Gaza. And as I said, I think if you've been paying attention to the economy, if you've been looking around you at the signs in the economy, the lights are flashing red, brother. The lights are flashing red. People are buying stuff. They're not buying cars. They're not buying homes. They're not buying stuff. The lights are flashing red. I think there's already some kind of in the United now. Europe is just absolutely screwed economically. It's flat broke, and within the next couple months, both France and the UK are going to come to the IMF begging for money, and that is the beginning of the end. That is collapse city there. But the US is we're up to our ears in debt, and that's coming due also. So meanwhile, in the quest of the ruling elite to dominate Russia and China and India, etc., Russia and China and India, etc., are circling the wagons and strengthening their hand. That's what I would expect them to do: circle the wagons and strengthen their hand. That's what they're doing, and they already got a strong hand. They got commodities. They got industry. They sell real things. They're old school, right? Iran's been around for what, 3,000 years, 1,000 years at least for Russia, 5,000 years for China. They've been around long enough to know I got to sell rice, I got to sell sugar, I got to sell coal, I got to sell timber, I got to make things, I got to build things, I got to sell things. Derivatives and things like that ain't going to get it done. Financial tools, it's not going to get it done for the long run. There's a shelf life for that, because that's all about debt. We don't live off debt. We sell nickel, we sell aluminum, we sell copper. People can use that stuff. That's the reality of these countries. They're old countries, and they know that because they're old, they understand that the dollar system is a system of symbolism. The dollar symbolizes something. That dollar is worth nothing. It symbolizes something. And based on what it symbolizes is based on the value. And they understand that. But they understand you can't symbolize. I'll put it like this. They understand the difference between words and symbols and the commodities that they represent. I can sell you a paper, an IOU that says I owe you 100 pounds of rice, but you can't eat that. But if I say if I show you I got 100 pounds of rice and I'll trade you for this, we could do business. Hey, I'll trade you 100 pounds of rice for this. You're like, I want to make sure you have the rice. I got this piece of paper, son. I owe you for 100 pounds of rice. I don't want that. I want the rice. And I don't trust you. I don't have to trust you. Let me see the rice. Bring the rice in a wagon. Here's whatever here's my sugar in a wagon. Here's my spices. Here's my furs, whatever it is that they're, trading, and we'll trade. That was old school. That's the Silk Road. That's what Russia and China and Iran and countries like that have been doing for thousands of years. They understand how to do that, and they understand the significance of that, as opposed to symbolic dollars. What's the value of the dollar? Look, the value of a bowl of rice is that you can eat it and survive. The value of a dollar, you can't eat it. It's worth what somebody thinks it's worth. It's symbolic of wealth. You got $100. The other guy has food in his basket. He has the wealth in his food in his car, his shopping cart. He has the wealth in his cart. You have a symbol of wealth, a symbol of the ability to buy food. This is what Russia and China and Iran understand. And the U.S. kind of is getting to understand it, because they're trying to take all the oil and the oil fields, because they understand that more than symbolizes wealth. It is an actual commodity that they can use. It's an economic choke point, as opposed to just using their submarines to close down a checkpoint so China can't go through that. No, they want to go to the alpha and the omega, the beginning of industry, which is oil, the lifeblood of industry. They want to grab the carbon for the world and hold on to all of it. That's the plan. But the Europeans are left in a situation, and they see the world differently because they've been around longer, and they're more about, from their perspectives, and politically, because they put their careers on the line, saying we must defeat Russia. But they've also said something else. They've said Russia is a threat to us, and that if we do not defeat Russia, we will be attacked by Russia. The United States never said that. I mean, maybe Lindsey Graham or some kook, but over and all, for the most part, the United States hasn't lived off of Russia's going to attack us, because it's not much of a plausible argument. Like, only some hardcore neocons have said it, but it's not real plausible because of our geographic location. But because of their geographical location, it was convenient for the Europeans to use that ploy. Hey, we got to do this, or Russia's going to attack us. They got a problem. If Russia gets a deal and doesn't attack them, then their people are going to say, we went through too much. You told us we had to go through this so Russia wouldn't attack us, and now Russia's not attacking us. What do you say? They can't say anything. They're all out of office. And because they've suffered and because they're corrupt criminals, some of them could be found out for their financial shenanigans. People like Monderline, come on, they're filling their pockets. And if they get found out, they could go to jail. And might I add, in a revolutionary atmosphere, shall I say, where in fact people have had it, where these countries are exploding in fury because of the poverty and the suffering that they're dealing with because of the decisions of the ruling elite. There could come a time when some of these members of the ruling elite could pay with their lives, for one reason or another. And they understand all of that. So the Europeans can't let go of the Ukraine project, even though the U.S. wants to. It's like, get this thing off of me. No. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. No. You got to stay. We need it. We need you. And we got to drag you into a war with Russia. And the U.S. is like, we ain't getting in a war with Russia. So that's where we are. This is a fight over who controls Russia's strategic border, Russia or the U.S. and its vassals. And the U.S. has already said, we ain't going to take another beating. We'll walk, but we're going to take all of our resources. We want it out of Europe, everything. We screw Europe. Europe is lunch for us, nothing more. We want to take all our resources out of Europe. We want to give up the fight in Europe. We want to leave you European idiots to fight Russians and die. That's your problem. We're going over here to control this oil. And that's where we are. But I think because Europe is on the verge of exploding, they don't have enough time. I just think they waited too long. Russia's too powerful. China's too powerful. Their acts have driven them all together, which I think they really don't. The Trump people don't have the political acumen to understand what they've done, and they didn't have the political foresight to see that obviously this would become the outcome. And now they're caught in a cycle of desperation. They're spiraling down into a really bad place. And that's where we are. That's where we are. The decision has been, I mean, informally, the question as to who is going to control Russia's strategic border has been answered informally, in that Russia is dominating the war and they're not going to stop dominating it, which means they're going to win, which means the question has already been answered. And I think the Europeans understand better than the Americans what the outcome will be. And the Americans, but the Europeans understand the symbolism here, that this is a question being answered for the whole world. And after that happens, the world will not be the same after Russia wins. The world will not be the same, will be different after Russia wins. There'll be a far different power dynamic after Russia wins, and Russia is winning. And the Europeans are horrified of that power dynamic because Russia's not next door to them. And they can no longer pretend with NATO that they're in charge and that NATO's the big power beast, because NATO was supposed to stand up to Russia and NATO's been defeated. There's no pretending anymore. What are they going to say? Oh, we'll stand up to the Russians. They've been defeated. And they know this is a situation that they're in and they're desperate. And so they're just trying to hold on for as long as they can, praying that something will happen. It's over. Russia's made their point. Russia controls its strategic border, and it's not going to lose control of its strategic border. And the only thing I can see happening to kind of iron this out is a fight between the Americans and the Europeans, not the Americans, the Russians. Excuse me. I think there's going to be some kind of fight. Excuse me. I'm just tired. Long day yesterday and today. I think there's going to be some kind of fight. I think that keep an eye on Trump. Trump's got some serious health problems apparently. So Trump could, we could at some point. I would argue it's probably likely. J.D. Vance is a much younger man. Trump's getting up around 80. His diet is crap, and he's got some problems, and he's got a very stressful job. So it wouldn't surprise me if J.D. Vance ends up in power. I ain't saying I'm a fan of J.D. Vance, or he's a good guy. He's a Palantir guy. He's a Peter Thiel guy. But I think the tech bros will have their candidate in there. But the answer is simple, right? This is, as I said, it's the world's decisive battle, because from that point on, it will have been decided that the U.S. does not control Russia's strategic border, China's strategic border. I think at that point, it's quite simple. The U.S. doesn't control everything, and they won't get the same level of respect. They won't be able to get away with the same bullying. There'll be more and more people saying, if you want to do that, you'll fight us. Now, right now, there's all this discussion about the potential for a showdown between the U.S. and Israel versus Iran. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know where that goes, but the potential is there. But I don't think that's another one that I don't think it'll work out for the U.S. and the U.S. and Israel. I don't think the U.S. and Israel are going to be able to accomplish their greater Israel project. So I don't know what's going to happen next. It would seem to me disastrous for the U.S. and Israel to launch an attack on Iran. They may, but it just seems to me, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out after what happened the last time that that's probably not a wise move. But these people aren't geniuses either, are they? So we'll see. Let me look, and we'll see if there are any super chats, and we'll answer the super chat. I know I saw one. Let's start here. Cobb fan says the U.S. and Europe is ruled by psychopaths, yes, and administered by sociopaths, yes. Millions of people now understand this, as evident by the genocide in Gaza. Absolutely, Cobb fan. Absolutely. I'm looking. Here we go. Sparky, Sparky was gone for a while. Glad to see you back, Sparky. For example, Javier Milei is parting out Argentina like a corporate raider. Oh yeah, when Milei, you know, it cracks me up when I see these people online, these libertarians screaming about how great Milei is. He's a puppet. The first thing he did was went straight to Wall Street. He's a Wall Street owned Zionist, and we got all of these people. Diehard will hand his company over to Wall Street as quick as he'll blink, and we've got all of these poor misguided libertarians thinking this guy is some kind of a savior. What a joke. How blind are they not to see that? I think that's it, everybody. All right, let's look at Rockfin new. We're going to check out and see if there's any. Oh, okay. Dobther on live chat says the symbol represents an emergent quality, i.e., obligation. The currency represents a bag of rice can't make you an F-35. That's a good one over on Rumble Rant. Dobther for the Dobther for the win. All right, thanks a lot. Certainly appreciate it, everybody. You guys have done a great job. I want to say, hey, thanks a lot. Here's one for the audience. Oh, wait a minute. Sean Marcos. We got somebody else. No. This is Sean. Sean Marcos says, Garland, Vance gave a speech during which one EU bureaucrat was sobbing. Imagine what would happen if Vance becomes POTUS. Yeah, they will be crapping themselves. They'll be crapping themselves. That's what will happen. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Well, I've been yawning too much, so I better hit the sack. I'll say this. Thank you very much. You can see, I want to thank my Patreons. You know, you guys really make this happen. Thanks to everybody for the Patreons. I want to thank everybody who donates over at Buy Me a Coffee. You know, those who do even one time, or those who do, you know, multiple coffees, those who do it monthly. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody. The PayPal, a bunch of people do that, and Cash App, etc. Everybody, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate that. That's what keeps the channel going. It allows me to be able to do this important work. Not the last but not least, there's my P.O. box for those who want to send something snail mail. P.O. Box 32, Glen Burnie, Maryland. If you want to send, like I said, some people send donations, but a lot of people send recommendations. They just write down a card, things they think about the channel. I've had people send clothes. I've had people send books, magazines. I mean, anything you can think of. So there's my P.O. box. Anything you can think of, feel free to send. I mean, not anything. Let's not be crazy here, but you get the picture. Thank you very much. My name's Garland Nixon. Make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. Any more? That's it. We're out. Peace.